You know that gut feeling when something's wrong but everyone tells you you're crazy? Well, I trusted that feeling, and it saved me from wasting another decade of my life on a lie. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago I believed I had the perfect marriage. My husband David and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and seemingly devoted to our life together. David worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, which meant he traveled frequently for conferences and client meetings. At first, I didn't mind. I had my own career as a marketing coordinator, and I appreciated having time to focus on my work and see my friends. But over the past year, something had started to feel off. David's business trips became more frequent, and he seemed distant when he was home. When I'd ask about his day or his travels, he'd give me vague answers and quickly change the subject. The worst part was how he made me feel when I brought up my concerns. He had this way of making me question my own instincts, making me feel like I was being paranoid or clingy. "Sarah, you're being ridiculous," he'd say with that condescending smile. "I'm working hard for our future. Why can't you just trust me?" And I did trust him. Or at least, I tried to convince myself that I did. The breaking point came during his family's annual Thanksgiving gathering. David's parents lived in a beautiful suburban home where the entire extended family would gather every year. It was always a big production. His mother would spend weeks planning the menu, his father would set up extra tables in the living room, and everyone would come together for what was supposed to be a perfect family celebration. This year felt different from the moment we walked through the door. David seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and making excuses to step outside for work calls. His behavior was so unusual that even his mother noticed. "David, honey, you seem distracted," she said as we sat down for dinner. "Is everything all right at work?" "Everything's fine, Mom. Just some urgent client issues I need to handle." I watched him from across the table, studying his face. He was lying. I could see it in the way he avoided eye contact, the way his jaw tensed when he spoke. But when I caught his eye and raised an eyebrow questioningly, he just shook his head and mouthed. Later, after dinner, I was helping his sister-in-law clear the dishes when she pulled me aside. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Jennifer said, lowering her voice. "Has David seemed different to you lately?" My heart started racing. Different how? I don't know, just not himself. Mark mentioned that David's been asking him about some pretty personal stuff. Mark was David's brother, and they had always been close. If David was confiding in Mark about something he wasn't telling me, that was a red flag. "What kind of personal stuff?" I asked. Jennifer glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Questions about divorce lawyers, about asset protection, things like that. Mark thought it was weird because David always talks about how happy you two are. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "When did this happen?" "A few weeks ago." Mark didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, watching David interact with his family and wondering if I was living with a stranger. He was his usual charming self with everyone else, but I could see the performance now. The way he'd laugh just a little too loudly at his father's jokes. The way he'd put his arm around me when others were watching, but barely acknowledged me when we were alone. When we got home that night, I decided to confront him. "David, we need to talk." He was hanging up his coat in the closet, his back to me. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't wait. Jennifer told me about your conversation with Mark, about divorce lawyers." David froze for a moment, then turned around with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. "Sarah, you're being paranoid again. Mark misunderstood what I was saying. We were talking about a friend of mine from work who's going through a divorce." "What friend? You've never mentioned anyone getting divorced." "You don't know all my colleagues, Sarah. And frankly, I don't appreciate you interrogating me based on secondhand gossip from Jennifer." The way he said it made me feel small and foolish, but something inside me refused to back down. Then explain why you've been so distant lately. Explain why you're always on your phone, why you dodge my questions about your trips. David sighed dramatically. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're creating problems where there aren't any. I'm working hard. I'm providing for us. And instead of being supportive, you're acting like some jealous, paranoid wife. Those words hit me like a slap. Jealous. Paranoid. He'd been using those words more and more lately, and I was starting to believe them. I'm not being paranoid, I said weakly. I'm just trying to understand what's happening to us. Nothing is happening to us, Sarah. You're imagining things. Maybe you should talk to someone about this anxiety you've been having. He walked past me toward the bedroom, dismissing me completely. I stood there in the hallway, feeling gaslit and confused. Was I really being paranoid? Was I creating problems in my marriage because of my own insecurities? But as I was turning off the lights and getting ready for bed, I noticed David's coat still hanging in the closet. Something was sticking out of the pocket. What looked like a folded piece of paper. I hesitated for a moment. Going through his pockets felt like a violation of privacy, like exactly the kind of thing a paranoid wife would do. But my instincts were screaming at me to look. I pulled out the paper and unfolded it. It was a hotel receipt from the Grand Plaza Hotel, dated from last Tuesday, a day when David had told me he was visiting clients in the city and would be home late. But this wasn't just any hotel receipt. It was for a suite, not a single room. And it was charged for 2 nights, not 1. The room had been booked under David's name, but there was a second name on the guest list, Amanda Chen. My hands started shaking as I stared at the receipt. Amanda Chen was David's work colleague, a woman he'd mentioned casually in conversation a few times over the past several months. According to David, she was a marketing coordinator at a partner company, someone he occasionally worked with on joint projects. I felt sick to my stomach. All those times David had called me paranoid, all those times he'd made me feel crazy for questioning his behavior. I'd been right all along. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to David, listening to him breathe peacefully while my mind raced with questions. Who was Amanda Chen really? How long had this been going on? And what was I going to do about it? By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront David yet. I'd learned from the night before that he was an expert at making me doubt myself. If I was going to end this marriage, I needed proof that even he couldn't deny or explain away. David left for work early, claiming he had a breakfast meeting with a potential client. I called in sick to my own job and spent the morning researching Amanda Chen. It didn't take long to find her. She worked for Meridian Marketing Solutions, a company that David's firm had indeed partnered with on several projects. She was 28, 5 years younger than me, with long dark hair and the kind of polished professional appearance that made her look like she belonged in a magazine. Her LinkedIn profile showed she'd been with Meridian for 3 years, and she had posted several photos from industry conferences and company events. In one photo from a marketing summit 6 months ago, I could see David in the background, talking to a group of people. I felt a chill run down my spine. 6 months ago was when David's behavior had started to change. I spent the next few hours going through David's credit card statements online. I had access to our joint account, but I realized I hadn't been paying attention to the details of his charges. I'd trusted him to handle most of our finances, and he'd always been responsible about money. What I found made me sick. Over the past 6 months, there were dozens of charges I couldn't explain. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays that didn't match the business trips he'd told me about, and purchases at stores I didn't recognize. There was a charge for jewelry from a high-end boutique, a $200 necklace purchased 3 weeks ago. David hadn't given me any jewelry recently. There were charges for flowers from an upscale florist, always on days when David was supposedly out of town on business. Most damning of all, there were multiple charges at the Grand Plaza Hotel over the past 4 months, always for the same suite, always for 2 nights at a time. I printed out everything and put it in a folder. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I found her through an online search. Rebecca Martinez, a former police detective who now ran her own investigation firm specializing in infidelity cases. Her website was professional and discreet, promising to help clients find the truth with compassion and confidentiality. I called her that afternoon. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is a difficult situation," Rebecca said when I explained why I was calling. "Before we proceed, I want you to understand what we might find. Are you prepared for the possibility that your suspicions are correct?" "I think I am," I said, though my voice was shaking. "And are you prepared for the possibility that they're not?" Sometimes the truth is more complicated than it appears. I thought about that for a moment. I need to know either way. I can't keep living in this uncertainty. "All right. I'll need some basic information about your husband's routine, his work schedule, and any specific concerns you have. I'll also need recent photos of both your husband and this Amanda Chen person." Over the next week, Rebecca conducted her investigation while I tried to act normal around David. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every time he kissed me goodbye in the morning, every time he told me he loved me, I wondered if it was all a lie. David seemed to sense that something was different, but he attributed it to my usual paranoia. "You seem quiet lately," he said one evening as we were watching TV together. "Are you still upset about that conversation we had?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Good. I was worried you were going to keep obsessing over nothing." The casual cruelty of that comment, dismissing my legitimate concerns as obsessing over nothing, made me more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Rebecca called me the following Friday. "Mrs. Thompson, I have some findings to share with you. Can we meet in person?" We met at a coffee shop across town, away from anywhere David might see us. Rebecca handed me a manila envelope. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your suspicions were correct. Your husband is having an affair with Amanda Chen." Even though I'd been expecting it, hearing the words out loud hit me like a physical blow. "I have photos of them together at multiple locations," Rebecca continued gently. "Hotels, restaurants, even what appears to be a weekend getaway last month. Based on what I observed, this relationship has been going on for at least 6 months, possibly longer." She showed me the photos. David and Amanda holding hands as they walked into the Grand Plaza Hotel. David and Amanda sharing an intimate dinner at an expensive restaurant. David and Amanda kissing in the parking lot of her apartment building. The worst photo showed them together at what looked like a romantic weekend retreat. David's arm around Amanda as they walked along a lake, both of them smiling and laughing. It was the kind of photo that belonged in a romantic movie, except the man in it was my husband. "There's more," Rebecca said. "I did some additional research on Ms. Chen. It appears she's been telling people at her company that she's in a serious relationship with someone who's almost divorced. She's been showing off expensive jewelry and talking about her boyfriend's plans to leave his wife." I stared at the photos, feeling numb. "So she thinks he's leaving me?" "Based on what I overheard, yes. She seems to believe that your husband is planning to file for divorce soon." That explained David's questions to his brother about divorce lawyers. He wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to leave me for Amanda. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to prepare you for what comes next. This evidence is conclusive, but confronting your husband will likely be difficult. Many people in his situation will deny everything, even when presented with proof. You should think carefully about how you want to handle this." I took the envelope and thanked Rebecca for her work. As I drove home, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and devastation. I'd been right to trust my instincts, but being right didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. For 8 years, I'd believed David was the love of my life. We'd talked about having children, about growing old together. about all the dreams we'd build as a team. Now I realized that while I'd been planning our future, he'd been planning his escape. The hardest part was realizing how expertly he'd manipulated me. Every time I'd questioned his behavior, he'd made me feel like the problem was my paranoia, not his dishonesty. He'd gaslit me so effectively that I'd started to doubt my own perceptions. But I wasn't going to doubt myself anymore. Chapter 3. The confrontation. I spent the weekend planning my approach. I considered various options: confronting David privately, exposing him publicly, or simply filing for divorce without giving him a chance to explain. But ultimately, I decided I needed to hear him try to justify what he'd done. I also needed to protect myself financially. Rebecca had given me the contact information for a divorce attorney, and I made an appointment for Monday morning. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. I was going to be prepared for whatever came next. On Monday evening, David came home from work in an unusually good mood. He brought me flowers and suggested we go out to dinner. "What's the occasion?" I asked, looking at the bouquet. "Do I need an occasion to treat my beautiful wife?" he said, kissing my cheek. The performance was so convincing that for a moment, I almost doubted what I'd learned. But then I remembered the photos, the hotel receipts, and the months of lies. "Actually, I think we should stay in tonight," I said. "We need to talk." David's expression shifted slightly. "About what?" "About Amanda Chen." The color drained from his face, but he recovered quickly. "What about her? She's just a work colleague." "Is she? Because I have some things I'd like you to explain." I went to the kitchen and retrieved the folder I'd prepared. Inside were copies of all the evidence Rebecca had gathered: the photos, the hotel receipts, the credit card statements, and a timeline of his lies. I placed the folder on the coffee table and sat down across from him. "I want you to look through this," I said, "and then I want you to tell me the truth." David opened the folder, and I watched his face as he saw the photos. His hands were shaking slightly as he flipped through them. "Sarah, I can explain." "No," I interrupted. "I've listened to your explanations for months. I've let you make me feel crazy for questioning behavior that was obviously suspicious. I've let you gaslight me into doubting my own instincts. I'm done with explanations." David set the folder down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before: desperation mixed with calculation. "This isn't what it looks like," he said. "Really? Because it looks like you've been having an affair for 6 months while lying to my face and making me feel paranoid for noticing." "Sarah, please. Let me explain what really happened." "Fine. Explain. But I want the truth this time. Not another performance." David took a deep breath. "Amanda and we did get close, but it wasn't planned. It just happened gradually, through work projects." "When did it start?" "About 6 months ago. We were working on a big campaign together, spending a lot of time in meetings and conference calls. She was having problems in her personal life, and I was trying to be supportive." "What kind of problems?" "She was getting out of a long-term relationship. She was lonely and vulnerable, and I made a mistake." I felt a surge of anger. "You made a mistake?" "This wasn't a mistake, David. This was a choice. Multiple choices, made over 6 months." "You're right. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I know I handled it all wrong." "Are you in love with her?" David hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'm confused about everything right now." "What about the divorce lawyer? What about telling her you were planning to leave me?" David's eyes widened. "How did you—" He stopped himself, realizing he'd just confirmed another lie. "I hired a private investigator," I said calmly. "I know about the weekend getaway, the jewelry, the flowers, all of it. I also know that Amanda thinks you're planning to divorce me to be with her." David buried his face in his hands. This is such a mess. Yes, it is. And you created it. Sarah, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can go to counseling. Stop. I stood up and looked down at him. For months, you've been living a double life. You've been lying to me every single day. You've been making me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. And now you want to work through this? I love you, Sarah. I know I've been an idiot, but I love you. No, you don't. If you loved me, you wouldn't have been able to do this. If you loved me, you wouldn't have spent 6 months planning to leave me for another woman. David started crying, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy I used to have for him. But then I remembered all the nights I'd lain awake wondering what was wrong with me, all the times I'd questioned my own sanity because of his lies. What happens now? He asked. Now you're going to pack a bag and leave. You're going to stay somewhere else while I figure out how to rebuild my life without you. Sarah, please. No, I'm done. I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the manipulation. And I'm done with feeling like I'm not enough for you. David looked at me with what might have been genuine remorse. I never meant for this to happen. Maybe not, but you let it happen, and you chose to handle it in the most hurtful way possible. He went upstairs to pack, and I sat in the living room looking at the photos of him with Amanda. In some of them, he looked happier than I'd seen him in years. That hurt more than anything else. The realization that he'd found with her something he'd never had with me. When he came back downstairs with his suitcase, he tried one more time. I'll do anything to make this right, he said. I'll end things with Amanda. I'll go to therapy, whatever you want. The time for that was 6 months ago, before you started lying to me, before you made me feel crazy for trusting my instincts. So this is it? 8 years? And you're just giving up? I'm not giving up, David. You gave up 6 months ago when you chose to start a relationship with someone else, instead of working on your relationship with me. After he left, I sat in our empty house and cried. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were also tears of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I could trust my own perceptions again. Chapter 4. The Aftermath and New Beginning. The divorce process took 4 months. David tried several times to reconcile, but I held firm. I'd learned too much about his capacity for deception to ever trust him again. The most difficult part was dealing with the financial entanglements. David had been spending our joint savings on his affair, and it took time to untangle what belonged to whom. Fortunately, the evidence Rebecca had gathered helped my attorney ensure I received my fair share of our assets. David's family was shocked when they learned about the affair. His mother called me to apologize, and his brother Mark admitted he'd been uncomfortable with David's questions about divorce lawyers, but hadn't known how to handle the situation. I should have told you, Mark said when he called. I was trying to be loyal to my brother, but I realize now that I should have been loyal to the truth. I appreciated his honesty, even though it was too late to change anything. The hardest part was rebuilding my confidence in my own judgment. David had been so effective at making me doubt myself that I questioned everything. My ability to read people, my worth as a partner, my capacity to trust again. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Through our sessions, I learned to recognize the techniques David had used to undermine my confidence. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse, my therapist explained. The abuser makes the victim question their own reality, their own perceptions, their own memories. It's designed to make you dependent on the abuser's version of reality. But why didn't I see it happening? I asked. Because it's gradual, and it's often mixed with genuine affection. The abuser doesn't gaslight you all the time. They do it strategically, when you're getting close to the truth they want to hide. Learning about gaslighting helped me understand that my paranoia had actually been accurate intuition. I hadn't been imagining problems in my marriage. I'd been sensing real deception. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Amanda Chen at a coffee shop downtown. I recognized her immediately from the photos, though she looked different in person, younger and more uncertain than she'd appeared in the pictures. She recognized me too, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then she approached my table. "You're Sarah," she said. "David's ex-wife." "Yes. I'm Amanda. I think we should talk." I was curious about what she had to say, so I invited her to sit down. "I want you to know that I didn't know he was married when we first met," she said. "He told me he was separated, that the divorce was already in progress." "When did you find out the truth?" "About a month ago. I started asking questions about why the divorce was taking so long, and he finally admitted that he'd never actually filed for divorce, that he'd been lying to both of us." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Even after being caught, David had continued lying. "I'm sorry," Amanda continued. "I know that doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry for my part in hurting you." "Thank you. I appreciate that." "He's not the person I thought he was," she said. "If he could lie to you for months while living with you, what else is he capable of lying about?" I nodded. That's exactly what I realized. Once you know someone is capable of that level of deception, you can never really trust them again. We talked for another few minutes, and I found myself feeling sorry for Amanda. She'd been manipulated too, just in a different way. David had convinced her that I was the obstacle to their happiness, when in reality, he'd been the one creating the whole situation. As we parted ways, Amanda said something that stayed with me. "I hope you find someone who deserves your trust." A year later, I was in a much better place. I'd been promoted at work. I'd moved to a smaller apartment that felt more like home than the house I'd shared with David ever had. And I'd started dating again. The dating process was challenging at first. I found myself hyperanalyzing every interaction, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But with my therapist's help, I learned to trust my instincts again, while also remaining open to genuine connection. I met James at a work conference 6 months after my divorce was finalized. He was a graphic designer who worked for one of our client companies, and he had a quiet honesty that was completely different from David's performative charm. What impressed me most about James was his consistency. He said what he meant what he said, and his actions always matched his words. There were no contradictions to puzzle over, no gut feelings that something was wrong. "You know," I told him one evening as we were having dinner, "you're the first person I've dated who doesn't make me feel like I need to be a detective." "What do you mean?" he asked. "With my ex-husband, I was constantly trying to figure out what was really going on. With you, I can just enjoy being with you." "That's how it should be," James said simply. Relationships shouldn't be mysteries to solve. Looking back, I realized that my marriage to David had taught me valuable lessons about trust, intuition, and self-respect. I'd learned that being called paranoid for noticing inconsistencies was actually a red flag in itself. I'd learned that real love doesn't involve elaborate deceptions or emotional manipulation. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust myself again. The hotel receipt I'd found in David's coat pocket had been the key that unlocked the truth about my marriage. But the real revelation wasn't about David's affair. It was about my own strength and intuition. I'd been right to trust my gut feelings. I'd been right to investigate when things didn't add up. I'd been right to demand the truth, even when it was painful. Sometimes people call you paranoid because they're hoping you'll stop asking the questions they don't want to answer. Sometimes the person telling you that you're imagining things is the same person who's giving you something to imagine. Trust your instincts. They're usually trying to protect you from something your conscious mind hasn't figured out yet. And if someone consistently makes you feel crazy for noticing things that don't add up, maybe the problem isn't your perception. Maybe the problem is what you're perceiving. You deserve a relationship where you don't have to be a detective. You deserve someone whose words match their actions, whose presence in your life feels like coming home rather than solving a puzzle. The truth might hurt, but it also sets you free. And freedom, I learned, is worth more than any lie dressed up as love.